parents came at age 17 with no money in their pockets, third-grade education, hardly a word of English. My father took a job on the Union Pacific Railroad, taking a job no one ever wanted. It was to wash dishes in a hot, steamy kitchen on a railroad car where he could also sleep and eat. And as a result, he saved virtually everything that he made. And then, of course, he started the inevitable Greek restaurant. Probably a diner would be a more accurate description. Now, I spent many hours there, beginning with taking cash, as they put it, at the age of 8. And as I grew older, I was assigned whatever work no one else would take, mopping floors, washing dishes, and so forth. You can imagine that my enthusiasm for that job was very restrained at the time, particularly since my young friends were all playing, and here I was laboring. But as time went on, I came to appreciate what my father had taught me. He also believed in saving for the future, and he used to say with tears in his eyes that he was going to buy his sons the best education money could buy, and indeed he did. Today, the majority of the American people do not believe their children will do better or as well as they, and frankly, I agree. I believe Americans have been misinformed and disinformed, sometimes quite intentionally, by politicians who believe that the American people cannot take the plain, hard truth. Politicians who are focused not on the next generation, but on the next election. Politicians who believe that it is not only politically incorrect, but politically terminal to ask for any shared sacrifice. I simply do not accept that. How could we have done this, not simply to this great country, but to our own children and grandchildren? Could there be a worse feeling on your deathbed than looking up and saying, I didn't try? Can you imagine a worse alternative? I can't. We owe more than we own. Some suggest that eliminating the Bush tax cuts would solve our long-term fiscal problems. Even if we eliminated all of them, though no politician is advocating that, they only amount to over 1% of the gross domestic product. Alas, just the increase in the cost of entitlements is 9 times as much as that, or 9% of the GDP. Reforming the entitlement programs must play a major role in maintaining the solvency of these much-needed programs, but making our unsustainable fiscal situation sustainable. We as a country consume far more than we produce, and because we save so little, we have to borrow the rest from foreign sources. How much are we projected to borrow from abroad? In general, the amounts are dysfunctional, dangerous, and unprecedented. Whom and how much and at what interest cost we finance or try to finance these gargantuan amounts will, in my view, have about as much effect as anything I can think of on the state of the economy. Now, in the course of doing all this, we also leave ourselves vulnerable, not simply to economic risks, but to geopolitical risks. Today, with the Chinese owning $1.4 trillion of Treasury securities, what assurance do we have that they won't use their leverage at an inappropriate time? We as a nation and we as a people simply must save more and consume less. And finally, no serious effort to assure our financial economic health can avoid the metastasis of healthcare costs. You may not know that the unfunded promises of Medicare are 5 times larger than Social Security. Recently, there was a big show made about how the new health care bill was deficit neutral. That ignores the fact of the long-term unsustainable costs of Medicare in the first place. We spend twice as much per capita as the rest of the developed world, and there's no discernible difference, at least in our favor, in health care outcomes. I don't want to be partisan, but I consider President Obama's approach to health care legislation one of the most serious mistakes he has made. Fiscally and economically, to be sure, but ironically, politically as well. First and foremost, he confronted something that he never imagined in his campaign, the most serious recession in 65 years and unimaginable debts and deficits. Thus, campaign promises, especially costly ones like health care, should have been put on hold until the economy had recovered. Among the very tough cost driver questions we must answer, but we don't even ask, are related to the last months of life. I pose these questions to you. Is it the government's obligation to prolong life infinitely, or is it only produce life as long as a reasonable quality of life can be obtained? In other words, should the government be responsible for very costly, heroic interventions, or should that be the responsibility of the individual taxpayer? It is also going to be important to somehow get the country focused on the future, and the young in particular. We need a new special interest of the general interest, of the future, and of our children and grandchildren. What are the possible solutions? In the first place, everything must be on the table. The far right has never met a tax cut it didn't love or a tax increase they didn't hate. The Democrats have rarely met an entitlement program that they didn't want to expand. It's going to require both benefit cuts and revenue increases. For the first time in my memory, I believe defense spending is going to be a very prominent issue. You may not know that we spend more than 14 countries combined, and I would predict that one of the prime policy debates in the next few years will be a question of priorities and whether, given our critical need to invest in the future of economy in an ever more competitive and technological global economy, we can continue to the extent of our militaristic adventures of recent years. I know all this is very daunting, and yet I ask myself again, is the alternative not to try?